What I've discovered by watching world leaders who discuss this openly with each other is that the big picture goal of our foreign policy is to get every country on earth to participate in one global economic system. So the first rules for this new global economy were written immediately after World War II in the form of trade agreements, which always govern so much more than just trade. And even though it took decades to get all three operational, there are three global organizations at the center of this global financial system: the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the one created the most recently in the 1990s, the World Trade Organization. Now, the idea behind this, the good intentions behind this policy, is the idea that if the entire world is governed by these institutions, and if the whole world is financially connected, then there'll be no reason for any countries to fight. But in the meantime, as the system's being created, as was so eloquently proclaimed by then President George W. Bush,
either you're with us, either you love freedom and with nations which embrace freedom, or you're with the enemy.
And being with the enemy will not be tolerated. And again, I don't expect you to take my word on any of this, so I'm going to let the guy who literally wrote the 500-page outline for what eventually became the World Trade Organization to tell you the overall vision. This clip I'm going to show you is from 1994, right before the Masters of the Universe created the World Trade Organization at a meeting in Uruguay. The person you're going to hear is Arthur Dunkel, who is the Director General of the United Nations, and it's no exaggeration to say that this guy created the economic system that's meant to be global.
If I look back at the last 25 years, what did we have? We had two worlds, the so-called market economy world and the centrally planned world. The centrally planned world disappeared. One of the main challenges of the Uruguay round has been to create a worldwide system. I think we have to think of that. Secondly, why a worldwide system? Because basically, I consider that if governments cooperate in the trade policy field, you reduce the risks of tension, political tension, and even worse than that.
So basically, if we just let these people run the whole world, there will be no war. And so what about the countries that don't want to submit to their rules, the rules of the market economy? Global rules, by the way, that none of us citizens get to vote for. You know, we have no role in who picks these worldwide rules. I mean, how many of you have picked up a ballot and had a World Trade Organization represented listed? You know, like, we don't get to pick these people, and this global government is not a democracy, which is something that is not lost on the rest of the world. And so what if there are countries, which there are, that don't want to give up their sovereignty to this undemocratic global system? Well, first, the Masters of the Universe generally try bribery to get the governments to change their laws in returns for cash. But if that doesn't work, the U.S. military and our partners install new governments in those countries. New governments staffed with people who are willing to change their laws to match the market economy rules. And so basically, our military is the muscle for what I usually call the world trade system. Here's Senator John McCain from January of last year, 2017.
For 7 decades, the United States has played a unique role in the world. We've not only put America first, but we've done so by maintaining and advancing a world order that has expanded security, prosperity, and freedom. This has required our alliances, our trade, our diplomacy, our values, but most of all, our military, for when would-be aggressors aspire to threaten world order. It's the global striking power of America's armed forces that must deter or thwart their ambitions. Too many Americans seem to have forgotten this in recent years. Too many have forgotten that our world order is not self-sustaining. Too many have forgotten that while the threats we face may not have purely military solutions, they all have military dimensions. In short, too many have forgotten that hard power matters, having it, threatening it, leveraging it for diplomacy, and at times, using it. Fairly or not, there is a perception around the world that America is weak and distracted, and that has only emboldened our adversaries to challenge the current world order.
Now, if you really want to understand this, I highly recommend reading the book, The Pentagon's New Map by Thomas Barnett. A few years ago, after I started Congressional Dish, I was tipped off by a listener who works in D.C., and he told me that this book has been read by many of the most powerful people in our current Congress. So I bought a copy. And sure enough, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Representative Mac Thornberry of Texas, this guy's been in Congress for over 2 decades, and he's the main author of the 2018 NDAA. Well, he's quoted on both the inside flap and the back cover singing this book's praises. And to be honest with you, I hated this book. I found the author arrogant and borderline evil, but I feel like if you want to know what's going on in Washington, you should read what they read. So here's a few quotes from the book if you don't want to read it. Quote, "Our model of future peace prevails so long as our willingness to wage just wars does not falter. America's gift to the world is not military empire, but economic globalization and the collective security it both engenders and demands," unquote. Quote, "We must encourage the spread of legal rule sets, which over time establish the conditions under which economic development and later democracy can flourish. We also seek to protect the global economy from disruptions to its functioning," unquote. Quote, "America's role in providing globalization's security is merely removing from the playing field those actors who willfully disregard its emerging rule sets," unquote. And in case you're wondering why most of us citizens are unaware of the reasons behind our wars, reasons which are, again, openly discussed by the Masters of the Universe meetings that most people just ignore on C-SPAN, why aren't you being informed of this overall goal? Well, quote, "We also engage in what are known as psychological operations to convince the civilian population that our goals in conducting any war will serve their long-term interests," unquote. So what I'm discovering is a story as old as humans. It turns out that the richest, most powerful people in the world still want to control all the money in the world. And what's new is that the United States military is acting as their muscle, and us United States citizens are paying for it with our money and with our lives. Now, like I said before, the first step towards getting an unwilling country to change their economic laws isn't military force, it's financial coercion. And the International Monetary Fund is the main player in this game. The way this works is that the countries that don't participate in the economic system often find themselves short on cash. Now, this can be for a lot of reasons, and a lot of those reasons are often the fault of the countries themselves. But oftentimes, sanctions are involved. Because sanctions really should be thought of as economic warfare because they cut off people, companies, and countries from sources of funds. And so what happens is that the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, the IMF loans struggling countries money, but in return, the IMF demands that the country change its economic laws. And the changes they demand are ones that make the country much more corporate friendly. In general, and I've witnessed this myself over and over again, there are 3 economic principles that can be found consistently in IMF reform demands, which are, again, changes to law that are demanded of countries in return for cash. First, governments should remove regulations that stand in the way of the accumulation of profits by private businesses. Second, governments should sell off any assets that corporations could be running for a profit. And third, governments should dramatically cut back funding for social programs for their citizens. And if you want proof of this, A Long History of the IMF Demanding Changes, this was a book that changed my life. A Long History of the IMF Demanding Changes in Countries Around the World is documented brilliantly by Naomi Klein in her book, The Shock Doctrine.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, in the end he'll justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.